Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So now moving on, we want to look at the maqsood of Tafseer al-Quran bil-Quran. So yesterday we looked at the maratib, the rutba, I mean how strong is the connection between the one verse and the other verse, which we're using as what? Tafseer al-Quran bil-Quran. Now what does this, now we've established that whether it's the Quran is doing Tafseer of the Quran, whether the Hadith is telling us the Quran is doing Tafseer of the Quran, whether one mujtahid, he applies that this verse is explained this verse. How does it explain? What's the link? So we know the strength of the link is either explicit, very clear in the Quran, it is the Prophet's explanation, or it's the ijtihad to join the two verses together. When these verses are joined together, how are they joined together? What does it do? Okay? So based on this, we can say here that there's a few ways of looking at it. Okay? The first one is what? That the one verse explains the meaning of another verse. One verse does what? Explain the meaning of another verse. It can also say, well, meaning, there's one word, ambiguous word, we don't know the word is, we explain the word. Or something is not clear, and the other verse gives clarity. Okay? Or one verse is left without any conditions, and the other verse puts conditions. Or one verse seems to apply to lots of people or lots of elements, and we specify it and explain each one of these individually. So this is only four. This is like 4 examples. It's not saying only these, but these are like 4 examples so we can see what one verse does to another verse. Okay, so let's take the first example. One Quranic verse contains a word which is kind of ambiguous. We're not sure of the meaning. Another verse in the same context, same scenario, talking about the same thing. It gives us a more explanation. For example, look, Allah says regarding Qawm Lut, فَلَمَّا جَاءَ أَمْرُنَا جَعَلْنَا آلِيَهَا سَافِلَهَا وَأَمْطَرْنَا عَلَيْهَا حِجَارَةً مِّن سِجِّيلٍ مَّنْضُودٍ. That when our command came, then we flipped it upside down and we sent down upon them rocks from Sijjilin Mandud. So Sijjil, what does Sijjil mean? Mandud means here laid out in order. Now if you look at, so in Surah Hud, it says Sijjil. Yes? And in Surah Zariyat, it says لِنُرْسِلَ عَلَيْهِمْ حِجَارَةً مِّن طِينٍ. So now, حِجَارَةً مِّن طِينٍ, so rocks made of clay. This is telling us what Sijjil is. Because both of the verses are referring to the same incident. Now why does this happen? Why does, well, someone asked me from a Quranic perspective, that why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use like different words in different places? It's like, for example, imagine like you're writing a text and you wrote like 10 adjectives of one word in the same sentence. It's a bit boring, isn't it? It was a big, tall, round, green, oblong. It's like too many adjectives at one time. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the story of Lut in different places, one place it has another adjective, in another place another adjective, so it gets a better reading. It's better, you don't have like this add sifat upon sifat, nu'ut upon nu'ut. So in one verse you have Sijjil, another verse you have Hijara. So it gives you a bit more clarity, more definite, tanawwu', different words are being used, different ma'ani. Okay? So now here, but you can't do this everywhere. It has to be a few conditions. It has to be talking about the same story. So this is exactly the same story, the punishment of the people of Lut. You understand? So the punishment of the people of Lut has been mentioned as such. Yeah. Yeah, so the teen is explained. Yeah, so I think the wrong colors on the blue, it's on the teen. So now we know Sijjil means here, teen, which means clay. So Hijaratan means Sijjil means Hijaratan means teen. Understood? Yes? Another example, look, this is a bit more complicated. Everybody following me so far? Everybody online following? Yeah? Another example is narrated from Nu'man ibn Bashir radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he posed a question to Sahaba. He says here that what do you say regarding this verse? وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ. Yes? What does it mean? إِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ. So what does zawj mean? Zawj means one meaning is what? Wife, couple, spouse. But another meaning is azwaj is also what? Pairs, couples. So the Sahaba said quiet. So then what he says here, he says walakin. So walakin means that when you say zawj, what came to your mind? Wife, spouse. So what came to my spouse? So he says, walak, it's not spouse. It's not that on the day of Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put husband and wife together and like, this is your family, your family, your family. Not like that. It's not that. Walak, it's not that. Rather, it's huwa ar-rajulu yuzawwaju nadhiruhu min ahli al-jannah. What will happen? وَالرَّجُلُ يُزَوَّجُ نَذِيرُهُ يُزَوَّجُ sorry, this is نَذِيرُهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ النَّارِ. What does that mean? يُقْرَنُ بَيْنَ الرَّجُلِ الصَّالِحِ مَعَ الرَّجُلِ الصَّالِحِ وَبَيْنَ الرَّجُلِ السَّوْءِ وَمَعَ الرَّجُلِ السُّوءِ فِي النَّارِ. What does that mean? So he's saying that zawj doesn't do with spouse. Zawj is with categorization. Categories. So it's not spouse, it's what categories. So this word zuwijat, categor. Is that right? I don't know. You just couldn't figure out. Yeah? So we have here zuwijat. So he's saying here when you have zuwijat, there's two aspects. One is married off, paired together, or one is categorized. So he's saying here, in this verse, it doesn't mean what? Spouses. It means categorized. How? He said, look, it is the same. Then he read the verse. What comes in Surah Safat? احشروا الذين ظلموا وأزواجهم وما كانوا يعبدون من دون الله فاهدوهم إلى صراط الجحيم. Gather those people who wrong themselves and their azwaj and what they used to worship. So if the wife is a believer and the husband is a non-believer, what's up with the wife? If the husband is a believer and the wife is a non-believer, what's up with the husband? What's he talking about? Azwajum here. What's he referring to here? Types. So gather the people who have wronged. Wa azwajuhum. You can even say this waw is what? Waw in the meaning of ma'a. Maf'ul ma'ahu. Along with their, not spouses, but along with those who have done the same deeds as them. So gather them, those who are the likes of them, and what they used to worship. Either idols. And then take them to fire of Jahannam. So he's saying like this verse, he's taking this verse, that azwajuhum here means what? Types. So then he's saying, well, this azwaj here, in this verse, clarifies what azwaj means here and there. Do you understand? So now this is two aspects. One is Hazrat Umar's ijtihad to say this verse linked to this verse. Yes? And the maqsood and the purpose behind him linking this verse to that verse is to explain the meaning. Bayanul muradul lafz. Now the word zuwijat here doesn't mean marriage, it means a categorization. And he used the second verse in Safat to say, look, this verse here means what? This verse here means type. So then the verse there also means type of, they will be categorized. Do you understand? Do you understand what's happening here? So we can use one Quranic verse to explain the meaning of another Quranic verse. Or the word, or one word, explain the word of the meaning of one word of another verse. Everybody following?
That child was born.
Any other questions? Yes, we carry on. Muhammad, Hassan, Abdullah. Okay. Another example is something we mentioned vaguely in one verse, and another verse clarifies it. For example, beginning of Surah Ma'idah, Allah says, "Uhillat lakum bahimatul an'am illa ma yutla alaykum." That what is permissible for you? The an'am, the cattle and the livestock, except that which we recite unto you. Except that which we recite unto you. Tala yatlu, recite. So we'll recite unto you that a few are haram. What are they? So then later in the surah, it has what? حُرِمَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةُ وَالدَّمُ وَلَحْمُ الْخِنْزِيرِ وَمَا أُهِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ وَالْمُنْ. So these bahimat are not permissible. So it says all bahimat are permissible except yutla alaykum. What is yutla alaykum? Mentioned in a few verses down, 2 verses later. So now this verse, second verse, is explaining something that has been left ambiguous in this verse. So 2 Quranic verses are linked together, and what? The maqsood, the purpose of the second verse is to clarify the mujmal, something ambiguous in the first verse. Do you understand? Everybody following? Another example is that one verse is mutlaq. Mutlaq means it has no, it seems like without any conditions. So for example, Allah says, وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ يُسَبِّحُونَ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّهِمْ. The angels, they glorify your Lord. وَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ لِمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And they do istighfar for those who reside on the earth. When you say لِمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, who's that apply to? Man fil ard. Huh? Everyone. Believers, non-believers, even it seems for example, anything, man is aqil. So anything, not like intelligence, because man is aqil and man is ghayr aqil. So this means this first verse seems to imply that the malaika do istighfar and they seek forgiveness for every single intellectual being on earth, whether they believe or non-believers. Do you understand? But in another verse in Surah Ghafir, Allah says, الَّذِينَ يَحْمِلُونَ الْعَرْشِ, i.e. the malaika, وَمَنْ حَوْلَهُ. So the Hamalatul Arsh, the malaika who lift the arsh, and the malaika who are around them, i.e. malaika. What do they do? يُسَبِّحُونَ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّهِمْ وَيُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ, and they believe in it. وَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So now this verse is now telling us what? That لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا is putting a condition to man fil ard. So man fil ard, i.e. those who believe from those who live on the earth. So the second verse is now doing what? It's now putting a condition, a restriction onto the first verse, which is is unrestricted. Do you understand that? Another example. Allah says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بَعْدَ إِيمَانِهِمْ ثُمَّ ازْدَادُوا كُفْرًا لَمْ تُقْبَلَ تَوْبَتُهُمْ. Whoever is a believer, then he leaves the fold of Islam, Allah will never accept the tawbah. So what? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بَعْدَ إِيمَانِهِمْ, those who disbelieve after bringing belief, then Allah will never accept. What does this mean? That if you leave Islam once, you're never forgiven, isn't it? That's what it implies, isn't it? But in another verse, what does it say in another verse? The next verse it says what? The next verse says, لَيْسَتِ التَّوْبَةُ لِلَّذِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ السَّيِّئَاتِ حَتَّى إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَهُمُ الْمَوْتِ. So if a person does sins, and the biggest sin is kufr, then Allah will not accept the tawbah. لَن تُقْبَلَ تَوْبَتُهُمْ. Tawbah is not accepted here. When? For those who do evil until they die. So this top verse seems to mean that once you leave the fold of Islam, you will never ever be accepted again. This second verse says what? No. It refers to what? Those who do sayyi'at, and the worst sin is what? Kufr. As a worst form of sayyi'at. So those who do kufr or sayyi'at until death comes unto them. So now this hatta idha hadara ahadahumul maut, this is now restricting this verse. That what? Those who disbelieve and continue on their disbelief until death comes unto them, laytat at-tawbah lan tuqbala tawbatuhum. Do you understand? So if you read the top verse in Surah Al-Imran on its own, it seems to imply that the tawbah is never ever accepted. Once you leave Islam once, lan tuqbala tawbatuhum. But the next verse is doing what? Is doing what? Taqyeed of it. It's clarifying that it doesn't mean if you leave the fold of Islam, you can never come back and follow Islam. What does it say here? It is meaning lan tuqbala tawbatuhum. When is the tawbah not accepted? إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَهُمُ الْمَوْتِ. So this seems to imply that never ever in any circumstance. And they say here, it never accepted when? At the time of death. So if a person enters the fold of Islam, he leaves and he has a change of heart again when he says, oh yeah, I made a mistake. He enters again. As long as not حَضَرَ أَحَدَهُمُ الْمَوْتِ, death hasn't come into him, meaning the pangs of death has come and he can see the unseen just before his death. Once that's not that state, then it's okay, permissible. Do you understand? Yes? In Bayan al-Murad al-Lafz, it's kind of more like a translation. In Bayan al-Lafz, Murad al-Lafz, it's like a translation. And here's like trying to do application. Who is it applied to? Is it conditioned, no conditions? Is it restricted, not restricted? Is it applicable to everybody, not everybody? Do you understand? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Against the will of Fir'aun and his army. And Musa has
so sayyi'at is sayyi'at. So the question is that if it's sayyi'at here, and this is yamutuna hum kuffar afterwards, right? So what I'm saying here is that this verse is saying here that hatta idha hadara ahadahumul maut. So if you do any sin, what the verse is telling us that the ending line for tawbah is what? Hatta idha hadara ahadahumul maut. So if you continue doing sins, or you continue on your kufr, which is this, you die as a disbeliever. Okay? It is, but what's the greatest? So sayyi'at and kufr are different. But what's the greatest form of sayyi'at? The greatest form of sayyi'at is kufr, and it is mentioned specifically here. And even another way of looking at it is by saying here, وَلَلَّذِينَ يَمُوتُونَ وَهُمْ كُفَّارٌ. So even in this verse, the Adamu Tawbah not being accepted is restricted to يَمُوتُونَ وَهُمْ كُفَّارٌ. And this verse is mutlaq, there's no condition here. And this verse is muqayyad, that the tawbah not being accepted for what? When death comes unto you, and when you die in a state of kufr. Okay? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So carry on, next example we have. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي يوم لا بيع فيه ولا خلة ولا شفاعة. So Allah says here, O you who believe, spend your wealth before a day comes in which there will be no khulla, no friendship. Khulla means what? Friendship. And there's no shafa'a mean intercession. There is no intercession or there is no what? Friendship. So what is the verse here? Clearly none whatsoever. La, that's la for nafil jins, but because there's mukarrar, you can have tanween on it. So it's really la bay'a fihi wa la khullata wa la shafa'a, but because of nahwa rules, when it's repeated, you can have a tanween on it. So there's no bay, no transactions, no friendship, and no intercession. Yes? So what does that tell us initially? Any intercession? Can anyone intercede? Will there be any friends? No. But yet, in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies this, and it says here, Al-akhillau yawma idhin ba'dhum li ba'dhin adu. Yes, there's no friendship. They will all be what? Enemies. Illa al-muttaqeen. Who will have friendship? Akhilla. So he says la khulla, and he says there's no akhilla except what? Muttaqeen. So now this is the first thing here that la khullatun, what does that mean? La khullatun what? La khullatun bayna al-kuffar. There will be no friendship between disbelievers. So this verse is telling us, by the illa al-muttaqeen, that this khulla is not mutlaq, it's not unrestricted. There will be no friendship between these believers. And next verse is وَكَمْ مِنْ مَلَكٍ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ لَا تُغْنِي شَفَاعَتُهُمْ شَيْئًا إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ أَنْ يَأْذَنَ اللَّهُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَرْضَى. There's so many angels, come min malak, so many angels whose intercession will be of no use. إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ أَنْ يَأْذَنَ اللَّهُ, after Allah gives permission for intercession and after Allah approves. What does that mean? They will, so لا شفاعة لا شفاعة قبل before permission, قبل الإذن وبدون الرضا. So now this second verse tells us well, the khulla and the shafa'a is going to be how? There's no khulla for the disbelievers and there's no shafa'a before Allah gives permission and before Allah's approval. You see the two verses put together? You understand? That's why you have to have when you're doing Quran translation and tafsir, you have to have a good isti'ab of the whole Quran. Okay? I mean, you have a good idea of all. And Mufassir will mention this. Okay? Are you following? Another scenario is where one verse is meaning it doesn't do it doesn't have any. Let's say for example here, look. وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ. Alif Lam is for jins or istighraq. So what does that mean? All women, al-istighraq, all women who are mutallaqat, who are divorced, who have been given divorce. So all women who have been given divorce, يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ, before getting married again, they must stay in iddah for how long? Three quru. Yes? Now, mutallaqat. When a woman is divorced, in terms, what can she be? She's either one of two things. So if you look at mutallaqat, a woman who has been divorced, she can either be what? Not pregnant, or she's what? Pregnant. What does the verse say? وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتِ, all mutallaqat. So all of them have to wait for what? For 3 periods. Yes? You follow it? Okay. Another verse says وَأُولَاتِ الْأَحْمَالِ, those who are pregnant. وَأُولَاتِ الْأَحْمَالِ, those who are pregnant. أَجَلُهُنَّ, what is the iddah? أَنْ يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ, that they give birth. What does that mean? That this verse, this is this mutallaqat verse seems to be It encompasses all types of women. The first verse, verse number 1, encompasses all types of women. But verse number 2 says no, it doesn't include ulat al-ahmal. This is excluded. They're not in the first ruling. So it means mutallaqat means what now? So mutallaqat 2 types. We're doing takhsis. We're saying this is to include everybody. This is not mutallaqat. This is mean mutallaqat غير ulat al-ahmal, not the women who are pregnant. They have a different iddah. It's a bit fiqh oriented, but that's not, we're not going to Masail. It's basically saying here that this verse now is giving us takhsis of that one. So you see the different ways one verse can apply to another verse. Do you understand? So before we go on to the next, before we go on to Sunnah, we summarize a few points. What is Tafseer al-Quran bil-Quran? Where we use one verse to explain the meaning, intended meaning of another verse. Then there's 2 points we need to look at. How strong is that link between the two verses? Is it something which is within the text absolutely clear, like a badal or a sifa or next text? Has the Prophet ﷺ told us, or is it ijtihad? If it's ijtihad, somebody's like the mufassirun or again, the ijtihad will differ. If the Sahabi said ijtihad, that this verse relates to this verse, that's stronger than somebody 1400 years saying this verse applies to this verse. So that will also vary according to who's doing the ijtihad. And within that you have some which are accepted throughout, that everybody says yes, this is what it means. Some which is okay, half, and some which people reject altogether. Then when we look at this, is what's the point? What does the second verse do to the first verse? So we say it can explain it can explain a meaning or translation of a word we don't know. It can do what? It can do takhsis, it can do bayan of a mujmal, it can do takhsis of an am, it can do taqir of a mutlaq. So for example, something is vague, the second verse clarifies it. Something is unrestricted, liman fil ard, for everybody in the earth. It says no, not liman fil ard, it's for those believers who live in the earth. Or it can be, there's an am and mutlaq, they're different. That's also the fiqh discussion. I'm not going to discuss that here. Yes, just you got a rough idea what happens there. So there are different ways one verse can apply to another verse. Okay? Understood? Any questions regarding this?
What should I do?
Just, why not just clarify it from before? Why say a general ruling and then...
Because it depends on why the circumstance, why it was revealed, in which context it was revealed. Do you understand? And if you have like, if you have like, again, you have everything at one time, it gets like all just so much stuff at once. I mean, the verse is revealed bit by bit. So a simple ruling, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتِ يَرْبَصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَ قُرُوءٍ. And then after another place, وَأُولَاتُ الْأَحْمَالِ أَجَلُهُنَّ, when another instance takes place, Allah reveals His verse. So it's bit by bit the ruling takes place. If you've got like 5 different scenarios at one time, it's a bit complicated. So one comes down, another time another verse is revealed. So at different times it's easier to implement and easier to understand. Any other questions? Anybody online have any questions?
How did we translate it to grab?
Okay, so we stop here today inshallah, and tomorrow, our next lesson inshallah, we'll carry on with Sunnah. How does the Sunnah do tafsir of the Quran? The tafsir of the Quran bi Sunnah. Okay? Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.